The hum of 40 overlapping conversations wrapped around every corner of Vivian Hale's two-story colonial, thick with the sweet tang of peach punch and buttercream birthday cake. Elena Carter rested one hand low on her 6-month rounded belly, the fabric of her soft maternity dress stretching gently over the curve, and forced a smile as another church neighbor leaned in to coo over her growing bump. It was Vivian's 60th birthday, the party Vivian had spent 3 months bragging about to every acquaintance within a 10-mile radius of their Atlanta suburb, and Elena had agreed to attend only to keep the fragile piece she'd clung to for 2 years of living in the finished basement suite, attached to her mother-in-law's property. Owen stood beside her, his arm loose around her waist, his gaze drifting every few seconds toward Vivian, who held court at the foot of the front staircase, draped in a floor-length champagne silk gown, and accepting handshakes and wrapped gifts from a rotating line of guests. Elena had known the argument was coming for weeks. Vivian had cornered her 3 separate times in the laundry room, in the grocery store parking lot, even late one night on the basement stair landing, demanding the baby's first name be Vivian Ruth Hale, a direct continuation of her own matriarchal line. Each time Elena had softened her tone, tried to explain the quiet weight of the name Margaret, the grandmother who'd raised her through her parents' messy divorce, the woman who'd left her a stack of handwritten recipe cards and a dented silver locket before succumbing to pancreatic cancer 2 years prior. Vivian had waved the sentiment off every single time, dismissing Elena's blood family as insignificant, next to the Hale legacy she'd built single-handedly after Owen's father died young. Today, surrounded by witnesses, there would be no gentle brushing aside of the conversation. An hour into the most guests migrated toward the backyard patio for grilled sliders and lemon, leaving only a small cluster of close family and elderly church friends lingering in the marble-tiled foyer. Vivian glided over, setting her crystal punch glass down on the oak console table with a sharp clink that cut through idle chatter, and fixed Elena with a sharp, unyielding. Owen tensed beside Elena but said nothing, his jaw tight as he stared at the scuffed toe of his leather dress. "I think we should settle this name business once and for all, before the cake gets," Vivian said, her voice pitched loud enough for every remaining guest to turn their. "I've already ordered the nursery bedding, the custom wall decal, engraved baby jewelry, all marked Vivian. It's only right my granddaughter carries my name, after all I've done for you. Free housing, paid utilities, steady client referrals for Owen's real estate work. You owe me this small Elena's throat tightened, her palm pressing harder into her belly as she fought to keep her voice steady, not wanting to create a scene in front of strangers. "Vivian, I'm so grateful for everything you've given me. But Margaret isn't just to me. She raised me when no one would. This baby girl is my only chance to keep her alive, and that's something I can't compromise on. We can use Vivian as a middle name but her given name has to." The shift in Vivian's demeanor was instantaneous, the polite, smiling matriarch mask slipping away, leaving only a cold, burning rage etched across her long cheeks. Her hands curled tight at her sides, knuckles whitening against the silk gown, and she stepped forward so quickly Elena barely had time to. Owen finally opened his mouth to speak, a quiet protest forms, but Vivian cut him off with a sharp snap of her wrist that silenced. "You dare stand here under my roof carrying my son's child and deny me this bit?" Vivian hissed, her volume climbing until it echoed off the high floor ceilings. "You think your dead grandmother matters more than the family that feeds you? Ungrateful girl, this is my house, bloodline, and that baby will bear my name whether or not." Before Elena could respond, Vivian's rough, manicured fingers latched hard into the fabric across Elena's section, her grip bruising through the thin maternity material. Elena gasped, a sharp jolt of fear shooting through her chest as Vivian hauled her forward a step toward the open concrete staircase that led up to the second-floor bedrooms. Guests around them gasped in unison, a woman's quiet scream catching in background noise, phones lifting in shaky hands to capture the young chaos, but no one moved to step between them. Owen froze completely, rooted to the floor, eyes wide with shock and cowardice tangled together, unable to reach out and pull his wife free. "I'm not letting you erase from this family," Ian snarled. And with one brutal, forceful shove, she twisted her arms and hurled Elena backward off the top landing tier. Elena lost footing instantly, her body folding in on itself to shield her stomach as she tumbled down 3 hard concrete steps before slamming flat onto the cold marble foyer floor at the bottom. Pain exploded across her spine and her abdomen, a sharp, searing ache radiating out from her belly, and a soft, whimpering cry tore out of her throat. She curled inward, both hands clamped over her bump. The sound of gasps and frantic blurred around her, distant steps rushing closer, but all Elena could stir was the stabbing, unrelenting fear that something terrible had happened to the baby growing inside her. Vivian stood rigid at the top of the small stair drop, chest heaving, staring down at Elena without a flicker of remorse on her face. A neighbor, Mrs. Helen Brooks, stumbled forward beside Elena, her wrinkled hands hovering over Elena's back, while other guests scattered, some pulling out their phones to dial 911, others stepping back to whisper among themselves. Owen finally snapped out of his paralysis, dropping knees beside Elena, his voice cracked as he tried to touch her shoulder, but Elena flinched away from his hand, too overwhelmed to let him near. "Call an ambulance," she whispered, voice thin and shaking, tears spilling hot down her cheeks as she squeezed her belly. Terrified, she couldn't feel the faint flutters of movement her daughter usually gave her. Please get an ambulance right. Something's wrong. Sirens in the distance minutes later, growing louder as the emergency vehicle turned down the quiet suburban street, cutting through the hum of stunned conversation. Vivian's foyer. Paramedics burst the front door with a stretcher, gloved hands moving carefully to stabilize Elena's spine before littered plastic board. Vivian lingered by the staircase, crossed tight over her chest, and Elena caught fragments of her defense drifting over the crowd as paramedics secured an arm, nose, and mouth. She provoked me first, disrespecting us in front of all our friends, and told anyone who would listen, tone calm and composed again, slipping back into her polished public persona as if she hadn't just thrown a 6-month pregnant woman down concrete. She lunged at me. I only protect myself. Elena's vision blurred through tear fog of mild oxygen, her gaze locking on Owen as he followed the paramedics out to the ambulance, his face pale and hollow with guilt. Her phone, discarded on the marble floor where she'd fallen, buzzed repeatedly with incoming texts from party guests, most of them blurred snapshots of the attack caught mid-fall. As the ambulance doors slid shut behind her, driver pulling away from the curb, Elena's hand trembled against her sore abdomen, and her phone lit up with a new text preview she could read through the transparent pocket of her hospital gown. It was a mass group message sent from Vivian to every neighbor and family member at the party, already spinning a version of events that used every ounce of Vivian's violence, painting Elena as the hostile, ungrateful instigator who'd brought the whole mess on herself. The ultrasound monitor in the back of the ambulance flickered to static beside her head, the faint, weak thud of her baby's heartbeat barely registering through the speakers, and Elena squeezed her eyes shut, wondering if anyone would ever believe the truth of what had happened on Vivian's birthday staircase, or if she'd already lost everything she'd fought to protect before the day even ended. The ambulance ride to the regional emergency room stretched on for what felt like hours, sirens fading to a low, distant drone once they pulled onto the main highway cutting through their Georgia suburb. The paramedic riding beside Elena kept one hand steady on her IV line, repeating soft, quiet reassurances that they would run a full fetal scan the second they rolled through the ER bay doors, but none of the gentle words settled the cold dread coiled tight in Elena's gut. Every small jolt over a pothole sent a fresh spike of stabbing pain through her lower abdomen, and she kept both hands locked over her rounded belly, searching desperately for the faint little kicks she'd grown used to feeling each afternoon. For the last 20 minutes there had been nothing, only heavy, aching stillness beneath her palms. Owen sat in the front passenger seat of the ambulance's companion transport car, separated from her by a thin glass divider that might as well have been a brick wall. Elena caught glimpses of him through the fogged window every time they stopped at a red light, head bowed, elbows propped on his knees, fingers scrubbing hard at his jaw like he could rub away every second of what had unfolded in his mother's foyer. He hadn't said a single meaningful word to her since the paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher, only mumbled a shaky, "I'm sorry," that had felt hollow and useless against the burning memory of Vivian's fingers digging into her maternity dress before she was hurled down the concrete step. When they finally wheeled her into an exam room, the nurse pulled a thin hospital blanket over her shaking shoulders and wheeled in a portable ultrasound machine. Dr. Simone Reed, her regular OB/GYN, arrived within 10 minutes, having rushed over from her nearby clinic the second the ER called to flag a high-risk pregnant trauma patient. Her expression softened with quiet sympathy as she lifted Elena's gown to spread warm gel across her bruised stomach, the wand gliding slowly over the curve while they both stared at the blurry gray screen. The heartbeat came through the speaker a beat, faint, a little faster than it should be, but steady, and Elena let out a ragged sob she hadn't realized she'd been holding trapped in her chest. Relief crashed over her hard enough to make her whole body though the dark purple bruising blooming across her midsection and lower back didn't fade one. "Your baby's stable for now, but this fall put you both under extreme physical and emotional stress," Dr. Reed said, setting the ultrasound wand aside to make quick notes on her text. "The bruising on your abdomen is severe enough that I'm ordering blood work and a full monitoring session here for the next 4 hours. No unnecessary movement, no returning to that house. Your body needs complete, and that environment clearly cannot." Elena, wiping wet streaks from her cheeks with the back of her hand. She glanced toward the exam room door, where Owen lingered in the hallway, hovering just out of earshot while he took a quiet call, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for. Once Dr. Reed stepped out to grab her lab orders, Elena waved him aside, her voice flat and drained when he crossed the threshold and pulled a plastic chair up beside the exam. "You didn't stir," Elena said. No anger in the words, only a raw, exhausted kind of hurt that made Owen flinch back against. 40 people watched her grab my stomach and throw me downstairs, and my husband stood there and not a word, not a single step forward to pull. Owens throbbed, his gaze darting away from hers toward the scuffed linoleum floor. "It all happened so fast, Elena, I didn't. Everyone else saw it happen just as quick did." Her fingers curling tight into the thin hospital sheet beneath. Mrs. Brooks stepped between us with seconds. Multiple guests pulled out their phones to record before I even hit the bottom step. "You're 30 years old. You knew how volatile she gets when she does it her way, and you still chose to stay silent or hurt me, in front of every—" A sharp buzz cut through their tense argument as Owen's phone lit up on the between them, Vivian's name flashing bright at the screen. He stared at the caller ID long beat, then silenced the ringer and flipped the device down. But the damage was already done. Elena knew he would take that call the second he sighed, would listen to his mother spin her lies about Elena provoking back, and would leave her alone in this cold exam room to smooth over Vivian's bruised ego before checking back on his injured wife and their all that talk about owing her for the basement suite and utilities, Elena whispered, staring at the faint, steady thump of the fetal heartbeat mod. That's what this all boils, isn't it? Your mother holds every single financial string, and you're too to cross her, even when she physically assaults them. Owen tried for her hand, but Elena pulled her back to her chest, creating a clear, uncrossed space between them. The hurt in his eyes didn't her resolve. For the first time since they'd gotten married, she could see the full weight of his codependency laid bare, plain and unignorable. Vivian owned the roof over their heads, controlled the client referrals that filled Owen's estate calendar, and had spent years drilling into his head that he owed her absolute obedience for raising him alone after his father's death. Elena had spent 2 years trying to fit herself into that unbalanced dynamic, bending to Vivian's endless demands to keep the peace, and it had landed her crumpled on marble foyer floor with a bruised, vulnerable pregnancy. Hours passed while nurses cycled in to draw and check her vitals. Owen stuck the hallway for most of it, sending short, vague texts to Vivian that Elena caught glimpses of when his phone unattended. When the doctor finally cleared her for discharge, she was given strict orders to avoid stress, heavy lifting, and any contact with Viv for at least 2 weeks, with a follow-up prenatal check scheduled for 3 days later. Owen helped her slip her stained maternity dress back her bandaged torso, his mood slow and hesitant, and offered to drive her home to the basement suite to rest once they left the hospital parking lot. The suggestion landed like ice water over Elena's. She shook her head, grabbing her small crumpled counter beside the door, where her cracked cell phone still buzzed nonstop with neighborhood group chat notifications and private messages rehashing the party's chaos. I'm not going back there tonight, she told him flatly, slinging over one shoulder. I texted Lila an hour ago. She's on her way to take me to her townhouse. It's quiet. No stairs I can slip on. No Vivian waiting to corner me about baby names or how I stay. Owen's face paled, panic flickering across his features at the mention of leaving his mother's property behind. Elena, that's our home. We can't just abandon the suite. Mom will lose her mind. We'll cut off all my client leads. Pull the referral network she built with the managed branches. We can talk this out. Smooth things over with her once you're feeling better. Compromise on the name. There is no compromise, Elena interrupted, stepping past him to automatic ER exit doors, the cool evening air washing over her heated cheeks. I won't trade my grandmother's memory for a roof that comes with a price tag of letting yours on my pregnant body. If staying in that house means I have to submit to her every demand and risk my baby's safety, she flies into a rage, then that place isn't my home at all. The quiet of Lila's townhouse wrapped around Elena like a blanket the moment she stepped through the front door, a stark contrast to the chaotic, high-strung energy of Vivian's birthday party. Soft floor lamps cast warm gold light over neutral gray walls. The air smelled of lavender candle wax and clean linen, and there were no staring guests, no sharp verbal jabs, no staircases that could become weapons. Lila guided her slowly to the plush sectional sofa, propping a stack of firm throw pillows behind her back and grabbing a thick knit blanket to drape over her legs, careful not to brush the dark bruising streaked across Elena's abdomen and lower spine. As an ER nurse, Lila knew exactly how invisible trauma stress could be. She set a glass of cold water on the side table and knelt down in front of Elena, her tone calm but unwavering. You're staying here until your follow-up appointment. No rushing back, no apologizing, no pretending none of this happened. Your body and that baby come first, always. Elena nodded, her shoulders slumping forward as the last of her forced composure melted away. For 2 years, she had calibrated every word, every decision, every boundary to avoid upsetting Vivian. She'd tolerated eye-rolling lectures, passive-aggressive comments about her freelance income, and endless demands to prioritize Hale family tradition over her own wishes. She'd done it all to keep peace for Owen, to keep their easy, rent-free living arrangement, to avoid being labeled the difficult, ungrateful daughter-in-law in their tight-knit suburban church circle. Now that peace had cracked open entirely, and for the first time, she did not have the energy to glue it back together. Over the next 24 hours, the full scale of Vivian's smear campaign unfolded. Neighborhood group chats buzzed nonstop with rewritten versions of the staircase incident. Vivian's close church friends posted lengthy, sympathetic comments, framing Elena as a young, selfish bride who disrespected her husband's family and provoked a harmless elderly woman on her own birthday. No one mentioned the bruises covering Elena's body. No one acknowledged the dozens of cell phone videos hidden in guest photo rolls. Everyone clung to Vivian's polished, sympathetic, the wronged matriarch who'd only defended herself from a disrespectful daughter-in-law's out. Lila pulled up the Facebook group on her own and held it out for Elena to see, her jaw tight with frustration. She's not just lying. She's systematically erasing every piece of evidence that she hurt you. People here trust her because she's lived in this town 30 years, because she ran the local bank, because she leads the women's prayer circle at church. No one wants to believe the nice church lady threw a pregnant woman downstairs. Elena's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments, her chest tightening with a familiar, old helplessness. She'd spent her whole life proving herself worthy of her grandmother's love, worthy of a stable marriage, worthy of belonging in the Hale. Now Vivian was stripping her reputation apart thread, and most of their community was happily led. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Helen Brooks sent a hesitant private. The elderly neighbor had been one of the few guests to rush forward and help Elena at all, and she admitted she'd watched Vivian initiate every part of the conversation. She confirmed she had unedited video footage, but had been too nervous to postly, fearing social backlash from Vivian's extended circle. The quiet admission gave Elena she was not entirely alone in. When Owen finally called that evening, his voice sounded exhausted and frayed. He'd spent the entire day trapped at the house, fielding questions, calming Vivian's tantrums, and listening to his mother recount her skewed version of events to every family member who called to check in. Elena spiraling, Owen said, desperate. She won't eat, won't sleep, keeps going on about how you humiliated her. She's threatening to pull all her banking referrals from my real estate business. Half my local clients come from her old work network. If she cuts me off, our income. Elena closed her eyes, breathing slow and steady to calm the anger rising in her chest. Owen, let me ask you one question. Are you calling to tell me you finally see how toxic she is? Or are you calling to pressure me into apologizing and changing our baby's name to fix career problems? There was a long, guilty line. I just think, maybe a small compromise would escalate everything, murmured. What if we use Vivian as the first name and Margaret as the middle? It's still honoring your grandma, but it lets mom save face. Drop all the drama. The roles stay intact. We can living. Normal, Elena repeated softly, the word on her tongue. Normal was me living in upsetting your mother. Normal was me swallowing every boundary so you wouldn't have to choose between me and her. Normal was me getting physically assaulted for wanting to honor the woman who raised me, while you stood by and watched. That normal is gone. She paused, her hand resting firmly on her belly, her resolve hardening to something unshakable. My grandmother raised me and my parents abandoned me. She taught me how to be kind, how to be steady, how to love without demanding repayment. Naming my daughter Margaret is not a compromise. It's a promise. I will not erase her legacy to spare your mother's ego. Owen's voice cracked, panicked now. Elena, don't do this. She's already talking about locking the basement suite, changing the garage codes, banning you from the property permanently. If you refuse to budge on this name, she's possible. Then we stop living on control entirely, Elena replied calmly. I'm not coming back to that house until he apologizes publicly, retracts her lies, and admits me unprovoked. And I'm staying with Lila. You either stand with your wife and your baby, or stand with your mother, your choice. She ended before he could argue further, cutting off his desperate attempts to negotiate her boundaries away. Minutes later, her phone pinged with a notification that Vivian had blocked her number entirely. No more calls, no more texts, no more passive household interactions. The door to the Hale family home had slammed shut on her. A second popped up immediately after, directly from Owen's phone. A photo-lished wooden nursery plaque. Clean white lettering engraved across the scene Hale. Beneath the image, a defeated message. Mom already ordered every single nursery custom piece. She said the only way you're allowed back in the family is if you let our daughter carry her name. No exceptions. Elena stared at the photo for a long time, her heart heavy, but unbroken. Vivian wasn't just fighting for a name, fighting for total control, over Elena's body, over her child's identity, over if Elena was building. And now, with block numbers, smear campaigns, and pre-ordered nursery decor, the back of a simple disagreement. It was a full, unrelenting war for who got to define their daughter's future. The morning sun filtered through Lila's floor-to-ceiling townhouse windows, soft and golden, but Elena woke with a tight, anxious knot still coiled deep in her chest. After a night of restless sleep, her body still throbbed with dull, lingering soreness from the fall. Every ache a quiet reminder that Vivian's violence wasn't just a one-time outburst. It was a warning of what she was willing to do to keep control. She'd spent months telling herself the Hale family held hidden kindness beneath Vivian's sharp exterior, that Owen's quiet compliance was just lifelong habit, that one day they would all see her side of the story. Desperate for even a sliver of allyship inside the family that had turned its back on her, she settled on the only remaining option, Owen's younger sister, Mia. Mia had always been quiet, soft-spoken, never joining Vivian's petty jabs or passive-aggressive lectures. On family holiday, she'd slipped Elena extra dessert, laughed at her quiet joke, and never once pressured her to bend to Vivian's endless demands. Elena had clung to that small warmth, convinced Mia was the secret, sympathetic insider who would finally validate her pain. She typed out a careful text, asking if Mia could meet her at the neighborhood coffee shop for a private talk that afternoon. No family interference, no judgment, Mia replied within minutes, quick and agreeable, and Elena let herself feel a flicker of fragile hope. By midday, the suburban coffee shop hummed with lazy weekend energy, the scent of roasted espresso and vanilla syrup hanging thick in the air. Elena slid into a corner booth, her maternity sweater pulled snug over her still bruised midsection, and waited for Mia to arrive. When her sister-in-law stepped through the glass door, her usual easy smile was gone. replaced by a guarded, tense expression that immediately dimmed Elena's optimism. Mia slid into the seat across from her, folding her hands tightly in her lap, and didn't wait for Elena to speak before rushing to explain herself. I need you to know I'm not taking sides. I can't take sides. The words landed cold and sharp. Elena blinked, caught off guard by the immediate defensive. I'm not asking you to pick anyone's side. I just wanted you to hear the truth of what happened. Your mom threw me down the stairs. I was 6 months pregnant, in front of 40 people. All because I wouldn't erase my grandma's name. Mia said, her gaze dropping to the tabletop. I saw the videos floating around the family chat. I sang. Then why hasn't anyone said anything? Elena asked, her voice thick with quiet. Why is everyone letting her lie about me? Why is no one defending me? Mia sighed, a tired, defeated sound, leaning back against the cushion. Because you don't understand how this works. Mom controls everything. She pays my car insurance, covered my college loans, still floats me cash when I'm short. If I publicly contradict her, if and with you, she'll cut me off completely. She's done it before, to distant cousins who crossed her. She doesn't forgive disrespect. From family, none. Elena stared at her, her fragile hope crumbling piece by piece. She'd assumed Mia's kindness meant solidarity, that shared frustration with Vivian's control. But Mia isn't an ally. She was just another person trapped in Vivian's orbit, too scared to risk her own comfort to stand up for what was right. You were different, whispered. I'm just surviving, Mia replied flatly. Owen's getting stressed right now too. Mom's pulled all her bank referrals from his real estate business. Every client she sent his way over the years is dropping his contracts one by one. He's losing half his annual income, and Mom's making it clear it's all your fault for refusing to. Elena's blood ran cold. She'd known Vivian was threatening financial retaliation, but she hadn't realized the damage. Owen had downplayed every yell on the phone, too guilty to admit how dire his professional situation had become, too cowardly to confront his mother's ruin. She's not just mad about a name, Mia continued, low and urgent. Mom built her entire identity on being the untouchable mate of this neighborhood. You refuse to bow to her in front of every person she knows. She can't let that go. She's not just ruining Owen's business. She's telling everyone you're unstable, that your pregnancy has made you irrational, that you attack. Before Elena could process the crushing weight of that revelation, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, her stomach dropping further as she opened the Facebook group. Vivian had posted a long, carefully crafted status, full of fake sorrow and calculated victimhood. She described herself as a misunderstood mother, claimed Elena had verbally berated her on her birthday, lunged aggressively, and fallen in a dramatic ploy to temptation. Dozens of comments flooded the post, neighbors and church echoing her lies, sympathy with her heartbreak. At every bottom of the thread, a tiny, neutral heart reaction glowed gray beneath Vivian's posted by Mia. Elena painfully. The one person she'd trusted quiet family loyalty had silently sided with, not with her. Not with the pregnant woman hurt and humiliated in her own home. Not with her wife and unborn niece. Keep her off my back, Mia rushed to explain, Elena's face. If I ignore her post argue, she'll target me next. I can't afford that right now. I'm sorry, Elena. But I can't help you. The conversation died after that. Elena didn't bother arguing, didn't bother begging for understanding. She simply nodded, numb and hollow, and waited for things and leave. The second her sister walked out the coffee shop door, Elena's shoulders slumped forward, tears stinging her eyes. She'd lost her home, her peaceful marriage routine, her neighborhood reputation, and now her lead of family allyship. Every single person tied to Owen's bloodline had chosen Vivian's power and comfort over her truth and her safety. She was completely isolated, in a conflict she never started. Abandoned, supposed to have her back. Her phone vibrated again, an incoming call from Owen. She answered it slowly, already know what he was going to say before he spoke. It's worse, Owen said, with panic and despair. Mom's old banking caller messaging my clients directly, bad-mouthing my work ethic, telling people I'm untrustworthy, drama with our family. My entire local business collapsing. She's serious. She'll ruin every profession I have if we don't fix this. Elena closed her eyes, staring out the cough window at the quiet suburban street, realization sinking in like lead. She'd drastically misjudged everything. She'd thought that a simple fight over a baby's name, a petty generational conflict she patience and boundaries. But it was never about a name. It was about Vivian's total unshakable over every person in her family, every life she touched. And Elena had wildly underestimated just how far Vivian would go to win. As Owen rambled desperate about lost clients and ruined income, Elena's gaze drifted back to the Facebook post still open on her screen, to the endless stream of supportive comments for her abuser. Mia's silent, cowardly heart reaction. Clear truth settled over her. She was not bitter, entitled mother-in-law. She was fighting an entire system of fear, loyalty, and social power Vivian had spent decades building, and right now, she was losing badly. The weight of isolation clung to Elena all the way back to Lila's townhouse after the coffee shop meeting with Mia. She set her purse down by the front door without a word, sinking onto the sofa and staring blankly at the wall, her mind replaying Mia's quiet admission that every member of the Hale family prioritized self-preservation over basic decency. Lila noticed her hollow expression the second she stepped out of the spare bedroom, where she'd been sorting through hospital paperwork from Elena's ER visit, and set a mug of warm chamomile tea on the side table beside her without pressing for details. Neither woman spoke for nearly an hour, the only sounds the soft hum of the range hood and distant crickets chirping outside the screen window. Elena kept scrolling mindlessly through the neighborhood Facebook group, watching new sympathetic comments pile up beneath Vivian's slanderous post, each line chipping away at the small hope she'd clung to that someone inside the Hale circle would stand with her. She'd begun to believe the entire story would be buried under Vivian's polished public persona, that the unrecorded truth of the staircase attack would die with the few guests who'd seen it all unfold. That fragile despair shifted entirely when her phone buzzed with a private text from Mrs. Helen Brooke. The elderly neighbor's message was hesitant, typed in short, trembling sentences, explaining she'd spent the full day wrestling with guilt over staying silent, while Vivian spread false narratives across the suburb. She wrote that she couldn't keep pretending Elena had provoked the violence any longer, and attached a cloud storage link containing the full, unedited cell phone footage captured from her spot at the foyer's edge the day of the birthday party. Elena's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone as she tapped the Lila leaning in close beside her to watch the video load on the screen. The footage was unflinching, crystal clear, every second laid bare without the edits Vivian's supporters claimed existed. The camera panned across the crowd first, catching 40 faces turned toward the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law at the foot of the stairs, before locking tight on Vivian's. They watched Vivian's smile drop away mid-sentence as Elena gently explained her wish to name the baby Mart. Saw her fingers curl into tight fists, tracked every brutal movement as she crossed the small gap between them, seized Elena's maternity dress hard over her pregnantly, and drove her backward down the concrete steps in one deliberate, violent heave. No flinch from Elena beforehand, no raised voice or aggressive gesture to justify Vivian's. Only a terrified, unguarded woman trying to protect the memory of her late girl. The camera caught Owen frozen mid-step in the background, unable to move to in, and captured Elena crumpling at the bottom of the stairs, hands clamped over bump, whimpering through the shock of fresh injury. Lila let out a sharp breath once the did, her jaw tight as she tapped the replay button once more to confirm every critical frame. This is irrefutable proof. There's no way Vivian can spin this to make herself dumb. Not with uncut footage. Relief mixing with a strange heaviness. For the first time since the party, she held tangible evidence that could dismantle Vivian's carefully constructed lies. Yet the victory. Proof of violence didn't erase the bruising still throbbing across her, didn't undo the damage to Owen's realisticness, didn't fix the rift between her and every member of her husband's family. She set her phone face down on the couch cushion, just as a new text popped Mia, sent separately to avoid Vivian seeing the conversation in the family. Mia's message held a secret buried layer of Vivian's history Elena had never read. A buried grief that explained the matriarch's all-consuming fixation on carrying her own name through the neck. Decades before Owen and Mia were born, when Vivian was barely 2 years old, she'd carried a baby girl to her 6th pregnancy, only to lose the child to a silent miscarriage late one. She'd never spoken of the loss to anyone outside her immediate household, locking away every memento of that unborn daughter in a locked cedar chest in the attic of the colonial home, and had poured every unfulfilled maternal longing into demanding his baby. Bear her as a quiet, desperate do-over for the child she'd lost so many years prior. Elena read the text 3 times in a row, her chest aching with complicated sympathy. She understood the hollow, endless grief of losing a beloved family member. She'd grieved her grandmother Margaret for 2 full years, still reaching for the silver locket tucked inside her purse every time anxiety spiked. Fleeting moment, she wondered if too harsh, if compromise might soften Vivian's rage, once the weight of that old heartache was laid bare. Lila cut through that wavering pity before Elena could sink deeper into guilt, her tone firm. Her old loss doesn't excuse physical assault, pregnant woman, Lila said plainly, reaching over to tap the paused assault video phone. Grief does not grant anyone permission to hurt another person to fill their losses. She could have told you about that years ago, talked through her longing for a namesake child calmly, instead of waiting until her 60th birthday to attack you in front of the whole neighborhood to force compliance. It is real. But her violent... Elena let the law sink in slow, separating Vivian's buried trauma from her unforgivable actions. She would never dismiss the thought of losing a child, but that private heartache did not erase her own right to honor the grandmother who'd raised her, nor justify being thrown down a staircase while 6 months pregnant. The new information complicated Vivian's character, stripping away the one-note, cruel matriarch label Elena to for clarity, yet it did nothing to inflict. Vivian had chosen conversation. Control over compromise, violence over vulnerability. The front door of the townhouse banged hard an hour later. Owen standing on the threshold with crumpled white paper printouts tight in both hands, his face drained of all color, shoulders hugged under a mountain of defeat. He didn't wait for Haitian to step inside, dropping the stack of documents on the table between them. Emails from Vivian's former banking colleagues, formal notifications terminating referral partnerships, A real estate board memo flagging Owen's business for association with conflict. Beneath the papers sat a typed note Vivian had left on the basement's counter that morning, stating she planned to list the finished basement space as a separate rental unit when Elena moved out permanently, revoking Owen's lifelong verbal promise that the suite would be theirs to keep rent-free for the duration of their marriage. "Mom, just cutting my clients," Owen whispered, sinking onto the edge of the sofa, racking with panic. "She's taking away the only housing we've had since we got married. She says if you refuse to concede the baby name dispute, she's filing paperwork to evict us from the property entirely. There's nothing I can do to stop her. She holds full legal title and land." Elena glanced at the unedited assault videos to her phone's cloud storage, then back at Owen's defeated expression. Vivian's hidden miscarriage grief explained the obsession with the baby's name, but it did nothing to soften the ruthless financial retaliation she'd unleashed against her own son, to punish Elena's refusal to family's legacy. The stakes had possibly higher overnight. Surrender the name Margaret, admit to Vivian's control forever, or lose their free housing, Owen's primary stream of income, and face a big fight for the right to name their own daughter. As Owen stared at the stack of devastating paperwork spread across the table, begging Elena to reconsider a compromise for the sake of their financial survival, Elena's gaze drifted to Mrs. Brooks' unedited video file, proof of Vivian's unprovoked violence sitting heavy in her pocket. She now held the full truth of both Vivian's buried trauma and her brutal retaliation. But every lever Vivian held over there still remained fully in her control, and the law showed zero sign of backing down, no matter how much evidence stacked against her. The air inside Lila's townhouse turned thick and suffocating the second Owen finished speaking. The stack of eviction and termination papers spread across the coffee table wasn't just paperwork. It was Vivian's final unspoken ultimatum: surrender the baby's name, or lose everything you've built. Owen leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes red and raw from days of nonstop stress. All his quiet cowardice, all his years of letting his mother rule every decision, had finally boiled down to this single desperate plea. "Elena, please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Just give her the name. Let the baby be Vivian Margaret. You still get your grandma in there. You still honor her. But Mom stops destroying my business, stops evicting us, stops burning our entire life to the ground. We can recover from this. We can move on." Elena stared at him, a dull, aching disappointment spreading through her chest. She had waited for days, since the staircase fall, since the smear campaign began, for Owen to choose her fully, to see the violence, the lies, the manipulation, and finally break free from his mother's grip. But instead of anger toward Vivian, instead of righteous defense for his injured wife and unborn child, all he felt was fear. Fear of losing comfort, fear of financial instability, fear of standing alone without his mother's safety net. "You still don't get it, do you?" Elena whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "This was never about the name. It's about whether I get to have any boundaries. Whether my body, my grief, my family's legacy matters more than your mother's ego. If I give in now, after she threw me downstairs, after she lied about me to the whole neighborhood, after she ruined your career to punish, she will never. She will spend this baby's entire life reminding her that that my family doesn't, that I exist only to obey the hail." Owen shook his head frankly, reaching for hers, but she pulled away before he could touch her. "One compromise becomes every compromise," she continued, tears finally spilling her. "I will not teach my daughter that violence. I will not teach her that honoring your own family is selfish. I will not start her life by erasing the woman who raised me, just so you can keep your easy rent-free house and your small-town client." The argument drained Owen. He sat back, defeated, his shoulders slumping. "Then what do? We have no house, no income, no plan. What am I supposed to do?" Before Elena answered, a sharp, tight cramp ripped through her lower abdomen. It hit without warning, hot, gripping, and far more intense than the usual. Elena gasped, dove forward, both hands flying to her belly as her breath caught in her throat. The room tilted slightly, spots flickering at the edges of her vision, and Lila was on her feet in an instant, her ER nurse reflexes kicking in before Elena could even process. "Okay, sit back. Breaths." Lila's voice turned sharp, urgent. "That's not normal, Stan Hicks. That's stress-induced tightening. We're going to now." Owen's face went deathly pale. All his earlier desperation about money and housing vanished the second he saw. He watched her curl in on herself, fighting through another cramping, and finally understood the true cost of war. Vivian's campaign wasn't just ruining their reputation and finances. It was in danger. 10 minutes later, they were speeding toward a OB clinic, Lila behind the wheel, Owen silent and guilty. The waiting room felt cold and sterile, every minute ticking by too slow, until Dr. Reed called Elena's name and led her room. The ultrasound scan confirmed their worst fears. "Your fetal stress markers are elevated significantly," Dr. Reed explained, her tone serious but steady as she pointed readings. "Your blood pressure's spiking, your cortisols are too high, and these recurring contractions are a direct result of prolonged emotional trauma stress. Elena, your body is fighting a threat it believes is life-threatening, and it's not resting. If this continues, you're at serious risk of preterm labor." Elena sat frozen on the exam table, her heart sinking. She tried to stay calm, to breathe through the chaos, to protect her baby from the family toxicity around them. But you cannot shield a child from a storm when the entire world is shaking around you. This has to end, he'd said firmly. No contact with your mother-in-law. No more explosive conflict. No more high-stakes fights. You're pregnant is medically high risk now. Your priority is survival, your daughter's. Those words, the final verdict. After the appointment, Lila pulled Owen aside in the clinic parking lot, her voice sharp and unforgiving, no longer willing to solve benefit. You spent asking her to compromise. You spent days prioritizing your career and your housing over her safety. Do you see now what your mother's abuse is doing? It's not just hurting Elena, it's hurting your baby. If you keep forcing her to bend, you're going to them. Owen had no defense, no excuses, no way to minimize the damage anymore. He walked the car quiet and broken. For the first time since the party, Elena saw pure, asked guilt in his eyes. Not guilt for himself, but guilt for failing his family when they needed him most. That night alone in Lila's guest bedroom, Elena's absolute lowest point. She'd lost her home, lost her neighborhood reputation, lost her trust in her husband, lost any hope of peaceful family harmony. Even her body and her baby's stability had been compromised because of a fight she never wanted to start. Loneliness was suffocating. Every Haley member choosing Vivian's side, every neighbor believing the lies, her husband too paralyzed to protect her and nearly irreversible. She sat on the edge of the bed, little circles over her belly, and let herself consider the terrifying for weeks. Can't fix this marriage. What if Owen's codependency runs too deep? What if I have to raise this baby alone? Tired of begging for protection that never came? Tired of sacrificing boundaries for peace that never lasted? She pulled out her phone and typed a message never thought she'd need to send. She contacted a Georgia injury and family law attorney, requesting a consultation for assault documentation, civil injury claims, and legal boundary protection for her pregnancy and parental rights. No more begging Vivian for decency. No more waiting for Owen to step up. No hoping the conflict would resolve itself. If no one would protect her and her daughter, she would protect them herself. Late that night, her phone lit up with a follow-up medical alert from Dr. Short and devastating. The fetal distress markers remain elevated. Continued familial stress will trigger progressive preterm risk, eliminate conflict entirely, labor complications. Elena locked her phone, laid and stared at the ceiling. The old life, quiet, compliant, people-pleasing Elena who bent happy, was officially dead. In its place was a terrified, exhausted but unbreakable mother, who now understood brutal, undeniable truth. The battle over her was never just a battle with Vivian. It was a battle for her daughter's safety, for her own self-respect, and for whether she would spend the rest of her life letting other people define her family's legacy. And she was finally ready to fight back. The morning light felt different when Elena opened her eyes. It was not the fragile, hopeful light of someone waiting for things to get better. It was the sharp, clear light of someone who had hit rock bottom and realized there was nowhere left to fall, only room to rise. She woke without tears, without the heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for weeks. The stress contractions from the day before had faded, but the warning from Dr. Reed remained burned into her mind. Continue this conflict, and you risk your baby. Elena was done begging for peace. She was done waiting for Owen's courage. She was done letting Vivian's fear and grief dictate her child's identity and her body's safety. She texted her attorney first thing, confirming her consultation. Then she texted Dr. Reed, requesting a neutral, mediated meeting with Owen and Vivian. No crowd, no audience, no room for performance. Only facts, medical records, and unarguable evidence. Dr. Reed agreed immediately. As Elena's primary prenatal care provider, she had standing to mediate a high-stakes family conflict that was actively endangering a pregnancy. She scheduled the private session in her clinic's quiet consultation room that same afternoon, a neutral space Vivian could not dominate with home field advantage. When Owen received the meeting time, he did not argue. He did not beg for compromise. He simply texted back, I'm finally ready to stop. Elena could feel the shift in him. The panic was, the desperation to save his mother's approval was. In its place was quiet, sober, the kind that doesn't make excuse, only accepts responsibility. Vivian arrived 20 minutes early, dressed immaculately in a tailored navy blouse and pressed her hair perfectly. She carried a thin leather portfolio, the posture of a woman still convinced she was about to. She greeted Dr. Reed politely, smiled coolly at her, and completely ignored Owen as he stepped into. The second the door clicked shut and locked, cutting off all outsides, Vivian's polite mask. Let's end this foolishness once and for all, she said sharply, sitting straight in. I've allowed you enough tantrum, Elena. You ruined my birthday, slandered my name across the neighborhood, and cost my son his business. The only way you fix this is by naming that child Vivian. We move forward, you apologize quickly, and I restore Owen's referrals. No. Elena did not flinch. She placed her phone on the table, pulled up Mrs. Brooks's unedited video, and slid the device toward the center of the table so everyone could see. Let's watch the truth first. She play. The room silent. Vivian's confident expression faltered frame by frame as her own violence played out in high definition. The unprovoked grab, the forced shove, Elena's helpless tumble down. There was no crowd to warm for, no neighbors to spies to, no room for interpretation. It was just her, brutal and unhinged, attacking a pregnant woman in clarity. Vivian tightened. Her hands folded so tight her nails whitened. For the first time since the party, she had no public narrative behind. Next, Elena pulled up Dr. Reed's medical reports. The abdominal scans, the elevated fetal stress markers, the preterm contraction warnings, the official high-risk pregnancy diagnosis directly linked to acute familial trauma. You told her I attacked you, Elena continued, her voice sticking. You told the neighborhood I was unstable, disrespectful. You destroyed my husband's career to punish me for honoring my grandmother. And all of it was a lie. You are the one who put your grandchild at risk. You are the one who caused every single chaos. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but Owen spoke first. His voice was quiet, but firm, stronger than I ever heard it. Stop lying. The words hung in the air in glass. Vivian's head snapped toward him, shock flashing across her face. For 34 years, her son had once defied her, never once spoken against her in any serious confrontation. Owen, you know what you're saying! Vivian snapped, This girl manipulated you. No. Owen cut her, unyielding. I watched it happen. Theron froze. And I've spent every day since making excuses for you because I was scared of losing what you give me. Scared anymore. He leaned forward, his gaze locked his mother's stunned face. You threw my wife down the stairs. You ruined my business to control a baby's name. You've spent weeks smearing her reputation to everyone we know, while she's been carrying my child in pain and fear. That's not protection. That's abuse. I'm letting it happen. Vivian's face turned with rage and disbelief. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. This is how you repay me? For a girl who refuses to respect our family? Sacrificed for me to control, Owen said flatly. You spent my whole life making me indebted to you, so I'd never have to build my own family, my own life, my own choices. I'm 34 years old, Mom. I don't need your housing. I don't need your referrals. I need my wife's baby healthy. In that moment, the lifelong codependency broke cleanly in two. Owen turned back to Elena, his eyes filled with longer hesitation. I'm so sorry I attacked you sooner, he said. I choose you. I choose us. Vivian sat frozen, her entire patriarchal power crumbling around her. She'd spent decades building her control through money, favors, and fear. Anne was walking free of it. She could no longer manipulate Owen, no longer threat livelihood to bend Elena's will, and all pretense of calm. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back with a sharp scrape against the clinic floor, her voice rising into a fury snarl. You think you've won? She snapped at both of them. You think ends this? Fine. Live in your little independent life, struggle to pay rent, struggle to survive without me. But mark my words, I will not be erased from that child's life. If you refuse to give her my name, I will hire an attorney. I will file for parental visitation. I will fight for access to my every single day of her life. She gripped her portfolio, spun on her heel, and stormed out of the consultation room. Door slamming hard enough to rattle. The second the noise faded, the tension drained out of the room entirely. Elena exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes stinging here, but from relief. For the first time since the fight began, husband was truly on her side. Of power had shifted irreversibly. Owen looked across the table and took her hand gently. No longer guilty. Just present. Just loyal. I'm moving us out, he said firmly. Hey, I'm signing a lease for a townhouse tonight. No more bay suite. No more living under her thumb. We're building our own home. Our own family legacy. Elena squeezed his hand, her heart lighter than it had been in months. They were free of Vivian's financial and housing control. Had truth, evidence, backing. They had each other. But as the room settled quiet again, Elena couldn't shake no threat hanging thick in the air. The battle over the name was over. But the war for access, for control, for a whole's life had only just begun. The drive back from Dr. Reed's clinic felt unlike any car ride Elena and Owen had ever shared. There was no tension, no unspoken guilt, no quiet fear of the next storm Vivian would brew. For the first time in their marriage, they were a united front, no longer husband and wife divided by a domineering matriarch, but two people building a family free from outside control. Owen wasted no time turning their newfound resolve into action. By mid-afternoon, he was scrolling active townhouse rental listings across their Atlanta suburb, filtering for safe, quiet neighborhoods far from Vivian's street, far from her social circle, far from her ability to drop by unannounced or manipulate local connections. He no longer cared about saving money or clinging to his mother's free housing. Every financial advantage Vivian had ever given them was poisoned, tied to control and obligation, and Owen was ready to start over entirely on his own terms. I don't want anything linked to her anymore, Owen said quietly, leaning over the phone to show Elena a spacious 2-bedroom townhouse 10 miles west of their old neighborhood. It's got a second-floor nursery room, no shared walls with neighbors, a private fenced backyard, and flexible 12-month leasing. We can move in 2 weeks. No more basements, no more walking on eggshells, no more owing her a single thing. Elena studied the list, a soft, genuine smile tugging at her lip, the first unforced smile she'd had in weeks. The space was small, unremarkable, and entirely theirs. No strings attached, no hidden debt, no matriarch waiting to punish them for every independent choice. It was freedom, plain and simple. They toured the property that evening. The air inside the empty townhouse was clean and neutral, sunlight spilling through large windows, every room blank canvas for their own family's future. While Owen spoke with the property manager about application fees and lease terms, Elena wandered the future nursery, pressing a gentle hand to her belly and whispering her grandmother's name under her breath. Margaret's legacy would live here, safe and uncompromised, in a home Vivian had no power over. Before they left, Owen signed the lease on the spot, submitting his application and first month's rent without hesitation. The second his signature hit the paper, the last thread tying them to Vivian's household control snapped completely. They were no longer dependent on her property, no longer trapped by her financial leverage, no longer living under her rules. That night, back at Lila's town, Elena's phone lit up with an unexpected private text. For days, Mia had stayed hidden behind her own fear of Vivian's retaliation. But now that Owen had fully broken from Mia's loyalty had finally. She sent a long, unedited audio file, recorded secretly weeks prior during a private fight between Vivian and her. Elena pressed play, and Vivian's unfiltered, unguarded voice filled the room. I pushed her down those stairs on purpose, Vivian snapped, raw and unapologetic, believing only me. She had the audacity to choose some dead woman's name, to humiliate me in front of four. She needed to learn this. If she won't submit willingly, she'll submit. The audio damning, unflinchingly honest and completely unscripted. No more claims of offense. No more lies about Elena provoked all. No more neighborhood act. Vivian had admitted her violence intentionally, out of pure rage and entitlement, and Mia had captured her. Lila stared at the phone in disbelief. This is the final coffin. Between Mrs. Brooks' video, your medical records, and this audio session, there's nothing Vivian can spin. Her entire narrative. Elena's hands trembled as she saved the file to her storage, backing it up 3 separate times for safety. After weeks of underestimating Viv's cruelty, of falling for her polished lies, she now held 3 layers of proof. Brutal evidence, medical trauma documentation, and a confession. But their small victory short-lived. Early the next morning, Elena's personal attorney called with urgent breaking news that shifted the entire conflict into its final. Vivian's legal team filed emergency grandparent visitation paperwork thing today, the attorney explained, her tone just. She's petitioning the county family court for mandatory supervised visitation rights the second. Her filing argues that your refusal to compromise on the child's name constitutes parental alienation, and she's requesting a judge order shared familial influence over the baby's legal identity, including final say adjustments. Elena's blood ran cold. Vivian had lost financial leverage. She'd lost housing control. She'd lost her ability to public without evidence. So she'd unleashed her final, most devastating weapon, system. She wasn't just a name anymore. She was fighting to legally insert herself permanently in their daughter's life. To force judicial oversight over their parental choices. To ensure she could never be fully erased from the legacy she'd spent decades trying to build. Owen's jaw tightened, his palm with resolve. She's willing to take this to court? To fight her own son and pregnant daughter-in-law in front of a judge, just control a baby's name, and to do anything. Elena whispered, staring out the window in the street. Because this was about winning one fight. It's about never her control. The attorney confirmed a preliminary court hearing was scheduled in 7 days' time. It would be the final showdown. The moment all their ends, all their trauma, all their boundary setting before a judge. Vivian would bring her church witnesses, her social reputation, her decades of community influence. Elena Owen would bring the video, the medical record, the audio confession, and the unshakable truth of what had happened. As the call ended, Elena looked over at Owen, who was already drafting a formal statement for his attorney to submit to the court. No longer scared, no longer hesitant. They had built their safe new home, secured their independence, and gathered every piece they needed to win. But Vin's last stand was here, and final. The balance of power had fully reversed. Elena was no longer the hunted, vulnerable victim fighting to survive. She was the prepared, protected parent ready to defend her child's identity and safety. But as the sun set on the first full day of true freedom, one terror hung over their new life. Would the court see Vivian's minute of legacy for what it was? Or would the matriarch's last-ditch legal effort steal the peaceful future they'd finally fought to build? The morning of the preliminary family court hearing arrived cold and sharp, a crisp Georgia autumn dawn cutting through the suburban haze. Elena woke early, her nerves steady rather than frantic. For weeks, she'd lived in fear of Vivian's power, but today was different. Today she was no longer relying on hope or compromise. She was relying on proof. Owen drove them to the county courthouse in silence, his hand locked firmly on hers the entire ride. He'd spent every night since signing the townhouse lease reviewing legal documents, organizing timelines, and preparing himself to testify against his mother. There was no more guilt, no more conflict avoidance, no more quiet loyalty to his childhood abuser. He was ready to stand in front of a judge and speak the truth. Lila met them at the courthouse doors, dressed in professional medical attire, and carrying printed copies of Elena's fetal stress records, our trauma reports, and Dr. Reed's official medical testimony. Mrs. Helen Brooks arrived minutes later, quiet but resolute, ready to testify as an unbiased eyewitness. The small, loyal team walked into the courtroom together, unified and prepared. Vivian was already seated at the plaintiff's table, polished and composed in a tailored gray blazer, her hair perfectly coiffed, her expression serene. She'd brought 3 church friends as character witnesses, all women who'd known her for decades, ready to testify to her generosity, her community standing, and her gentle maternal character. She scanned the room coolly when Elena and Owen entered, her eyes flashing with quiet defiance. The second the judge took the bench, the courtroom fell completely silent. Vivian's attorney opened first, painting a dramatic portrait of a wronged, grieving grandmother. He described Vivian's decades of community service, her selfless parenting after her husband, and her long-buried grief over her own lost infant. He argued that Elena's refusal to compromise on the baby's name was unreasonable, disrespectful, and a form of petty parental alienation, claiming Vivian only sought loving grandparental involvement in her granddaughter's life. Ms. Hale has devoted her life to Sheku harmony and family unity, the attorney. She is not a violin. This unfortunate staircase incident was a clumsy misunderstanding, escalated by a pregnant client's emotional instability. To bar her from her own granddaughter's life entirely over a trivial naming dispute is cruel and disproportionate. He called Vivian to testify. Vivian spoke softly, tearful and remorseful, her performance flawless. She painted herself as patient and generous, claimed she'd only ever tried to love and support her son's family, and insisted the staircase shove was an involuntary, defensive reaction after Elena aggressively confronted her. She denied any intentional harm, denied orchestrating a neighborhood campaign, denied financially ruining Owen's business out of return. It was the same polished lie she'd told for weeks, but today, there was hard evidence waiting to. When Elena's attorney began the case, the tone of the courtroom shifted. First, she submitted Dr. Reed's full medical documentation, photos of Elena's abdominal bruising, elevated fetal stress results, and official notes linking preterm contraction risks directly to Vivian's physical assault and ongoing harassment. The judge reviewed every page carefully, his expression. Next, Mrs. Brooks stand. The elderly neighbor spoke gently but firmly, testifying under oath that Vivian's attack was unprovoked, deliberate, and witnessed by dozens of guests. She confirmed Elena had remained calm and respectful throughout the naming conversation, before Vivian's sudden violence. Then the attorney played Mrs. Brooks' unedited CO. The silent footage filled the courtroom screen, clear, unfiltered. Every precise movement of Vivian grabbing Elena's pregnant torso, every brutal shove down the concrete steps, every helpless flinch from Elena as she crashed to the floor. The court roared softly. Vivian's church witness froze mid-breath, their confident expressions crumbling. The judge's gaze never left the screen. Before Vivian's attorney could recover, Elena's team submitted Mia's audio recording. The second Vivian's unguarded voice echoed through speakers. I pushed her down those on purpose. She was in her place. Vivian's perfect composed completely, strained of color, her hand in her lap. The tearful, grieving grandmother vanished in an instant, leaving only the entitled, ruthless patriarch underneath. The final, most powerful thing from Owen. He took the stand slowly, swore under oath, and turned to face the judge with honesty. I grew up believing mother could do no wrong, he said, unclear. I spent my entire adult life indebted to her, scared to lose her financial support, scared to break the peace, scared to choose my own approval. I stood in on her birthday, and watched her hurt my pregnant wife because I was a coward. I let her lie, destroy my business, let her terrorize Elena for weeks, because I was the truth. My grandmother. She is controlling, manipulative, and violent when she does not get her way. He paused, glancing back at Elena with quiet, unshakable loyalty. My wife did nothing wrong. She only wanted to honor the woman who raised her. My mother turned that simple, loving choice into violence, public humiliation, and endless legal warfare. I support my wife's right to name our child whatever she chooses. I support her boundaries. I choose my over my mother's ego. The testimony landed like a verdict all its own. Vivian stared at her in utter disbelief, her mouth parted, unable to process that her lifelong control over him had finally, irreversibly broken. After closing arguments, the judge ruled from the bench immediately. No delay, served decision. First, he stated firmly, the court finds zero evidence of parental alienation. The defendant's refusal to name her child is a reasonable, heartfelt familial choice, not neglect or cruelty. Second, the video evidence, audio confession, eyewitness testimony, and medical records collectively prove the plaintiff's physical assault was deliberate, unprovoked, and conduct a high-risk pregnant woman. Third, this court denies the emergency grandparent petition in full. Ms. Vivian Hale is barred from unsupervised contact with Elena Carr during the remainder of her pregnancy. Any future grandparental visitation must be court-supervised, limited, and contingent on zero harassment or retaliation. Fourth, the defendant holds full exclusive parental authority over her child's legal name. No party, familial or otherwise, has jurisdiction at parental choice. The ruling was final, unappealable in its core, and everything Elena had fought for. Tears blurred Elena's eyes. Not pain, but a validation. After weeks of lie, humiliation, violence, and fear, the truth had finally won. But as the judge entered and the room began to clear, Vivian cornered Elena in the empty courthouse hallway, her voice low, venomous, broken despite her defeat. She leaned in close, no longer performing kindness for witnesses or the court, sharp and furious. "You won today," she hit. "But don't think this is over. I will file an appeal. I will keep fighting. I will never let you erase me from the family. That one way or another." Elena stood tall, hand resting protectively over her belly, no longer afraid of Vivian's threats. The legal was won. The truth was public. Her daughter's name was safe. But Vivian's bitter, unending promise hung in the hallway air, a final warning that the residual tension between them would never fully disappear. The week after the court hearing unfolded at a slow, gentle pace, a stark contrast to the frantic, high-stakes chaos that had filled every prior day. Elena and Owen spent most of their free hours unpacking boxes inside their new 2-bedroom townhouse, the quiet suburban street outside free of Vivian's looming colonial home and the painful memories tied to its staircase. Every piece of furniture they set up, every baby blanket folded into the empty second bedroom, felt like a quiet rejection of the control Vivian had spent decades wielding over their lives. Owen received a formal letter from Vivian's attorney 3 days post-hearing, stating she had abandoned plans to file an appeal. The stack of irrefutable evidence, the assault video, Mia's recorded confession, Elena's documented prenatal trauma, made any further legal push a costly, winnowless gamble for Vivian, one that would only lay her violent conduct bare before a second judge and a wider public record. The threat she'd spat in the courthouse hallway had been hollow, born purely from wounded pride rather than actionable power. Vivian chose to retreat, rather than risk complete public ruin within their tight-knit church and neighborhood circles. Small, lingering threads of old conflict unraveled one by one over those 7 days. Owen emailed every former banking referral contact Vivian had poisoned against his real estate business, attaching redacted snippets of the court's official ruling and a brief, honest explanation of the full story behind their family rift. Slowly, clients began reaching back out to rebuild his roster, restoring his income stream without a single favor or financial tie to his mother. Mia sent a soft, apologetic text one evening, admitting she'd stayed neutral out of fear for far too long, and asked if she could visit once the baby arrived for limited, supervised time, separate from Vivian's presence. Elena replied with quiet forgiveness. She understood the weight of Vivian's financial hold over her sister-in-law, even if she could never forget Mia's silence during her darkest hours. The two agreed to a fragile, low-pressure relationship, built entirely outside Vivian's sphere of influence. Dr. Reed scheduled a follow-up prenatal checkup mid-week, and the news was all. Elena's blood pressure had stabilized. Fetal distress markers dropped back into a safe range, and the recurring stress-induced contractions had vanished completely. The bruising across her abdomen and spine had faded to faint, pale discoloration, physical scars marking the end of a brutal chapter rather than an ongoing threat. As the ultrasound wand glided over her belly, they both watched their daughter kick steadily on the screen, unharmed and calm inside her mother's body, proof that removing Vivian's constant harassment had healed them both, body and spirit. On a cool Saturday evening, once the last moving box had emptied, Owen hung a framed ultrasound print on the pale blue nursery wall. Alongside it, he mounted a small polished wooden, carved simply with Margaret Hill. No compromises, no middle names, no concessions to anyone's legacy but Elena's beloved. Elena pulled a dented silver locket from her purse, the one Margaret had left her before passing away from pancreatic cancer, and set it on the nursery dresser beside folded onesies and tiny knit booties. She twisted the metal between fingers, breathing in the quiet peace of a space entirely her own. Lila stopped by for dinner that night, bringing a homemade peach pie and a stack of soft newborn swaddles as a housing gift. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, laughing softly as they talked about uncomplicated, ordinary things. Baby showers without forced attention, weekend trips to quiet state parks, slow mornings without neighborhood group chat drama or looming deadlines. There was no need to rehash court battle, no need to relive the terror of the birthday fall. All of that sat firm in the past, a heavy price they'd paid to claim their independence. After Lila headed home, dusk settled. Owen pulled Elena into a slow, gentle hug in the nursery doorway, his hands light and careful against her mounted belly. He spoke quietly of the shame he carried for standing by and doing nothing to hurt her, of the years he'd wasted trapped codependency, of the promise he intended to keep for their lives, to always stand between any harm, to prioritize their small family above every old obligation and generational demand. Elena rested her head against his chest, no lingering resentment weighing her down. The trust between them had not been magic stored overnight, but it was rebuilding, steady and unrushed, rooted in the choice he'd made to break free from his mother's control rather than abandon his wife. Later, once Owen had fallen asleep on the living room sofa after leftover pie, Elena slipped back to alone. She sank onto a soft rocking chair near the window, moonlight spilling over the name plaque Margaret's name, and pressed one warm palm to her belly. Outside the glass, there were marble entryways, no kite stair landings, no 40 staring party witnesses. Only quiet oak trees lining up Bourbon Street, distant crickets through the autumn air, no trace of Vivian's imposing colonial height. She whispered the name Margaret soft enough only her own daughter could hear it, slow and tender, honoring the woman who had raised her through abandonment and grief, claiming that quiet legacy without guilt or fear for the first time in months. She thought of all along the way. Her free basement suite, her easy neighborhood reputation, the illusion of a perfectly harmonious relationship. But every loss had bought her something far more precious: bodily autonomy, the right to shape her child's identity, a marriage built on equal loyalty rather than obligation, and a home where safety came first. The court ruling had set boundaries for Vivian: supervised, limited parental visits only, no unsupervised contact, zero room to interfere with parental choices. But Elena felt for revenge. Vivian carried her own lifelong grief over the infant daughter she'd lost decades prior, a pain that had curdled into bitter, controlling rage, and the loss of her community standing abandoned appeal, and broken hold of punishment enough. Elena did not need to fight her further. She only needed to protect the quiet, gentle man Owen had built. She sat in a rocking chair for a long while, breathing low, unburdened air, free from the constant knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest since Vith's birthday party. The long battle over a single name had never truly been about letters carved in wood or engraved jewelry. It had been a fight to decide their family's story. Vivian, clinging to power and the ghosts of her own unfulfilled longing, or Elena, holding fast to the quiet love of the grandmother who'd saved her as a child. Outside lights flickered on one by one. Somewhere far away, Vivian's empty eco-colonial home stood silent, stripped of leverage she hoarded for years. Here, in a small warm townhouse nursery, Elena held everything that mattered: her baby girl growing inside her, a husband who'd finally learned to stand beside her, the memory of Margaret safe and immortalized in her daughter's name, and a quiet, unshakable peace she'd feared she would never get to feel again.